Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for.
All right, everybody, I'm back. Gonna be back. So a little bit of a different setup today. Actually at the in-laws house right now. Car is getting fixed right down the street. So wasn't planning on doing any recordings or anything today. We don't normally do a Friday Aaron Torres pod. We did get a piece of late-breaking college hoops news, though, that I do think we need to address. It is injury news, and it is involving Kentucky point guard Jaland Lowe. Okay, so for people, I think if you're a college hoops fan, you know the backstory here, right? But Jaland Lowe was at Pitt last year, all ACC third team, about 17.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, 5.5 assists. And basically, when he entered the transfer portal, if I remember correctly, he was kind of one of the first big commitments that Kentucky landed. And I think, frankly, not only was he one of the first big commitments that Kentucky landed, but the roster was largely built around him. Fast point guard, jet quick with the ball, put a bunch of athletes around him. So you add him, then you add Mo Diabate, you add Quaintance, all that. And he was the guy that, listen, I don't know if he's the best player, but I do think you could argue he is the most important player on this team. And obviously the piece of news is this, is that after injuring his shoulder in the preseason, my buddy Jack Pilgrim on, I guess it would have been Thursday afternoon, reported that Jaland Lowe, Kentucky's projected starting point guard, all ACC third team, has re-injured his shoulder. And I think right now, as I record, and I always say this stuff is subject to change, but I bring it up because pretty much everything is on the table. They could rest him for a while and try to let the injury heal naturally. They could do surgery. Listen, I'm a lot of things. I'm not a doctor. I'll leave it up to the doctors to decide. But what I will say is this. It does not sound like he is coming back anytime soon. And I think the big question becomes really two or three things. One, what happens next for Kentucky? And then two, I think as importantly, I see a lot of this, and let's just address it. How much blame does the staff get for not really having a true backup plan if something like this happened, especially, by the way, coming off the multiple injuries late last year, including, ironically, sadly, the shoulder injury for the point guard last year, Lamont Butler. Let's go ahead and dive into both parts, okay? So as far as the roster construction is concerned, I want to take half a second here and say this. I think there are some reasons to blame the coaching staff and Mark Pope for the construction of this roster, and I think there are some that are a little bit unfair. Okay, so the first thing that's totally unfair, like Jaland Lowe has no injury history before the last month, okay? So when you took this kid, you never take a player anticipating injuries are going to happen. And just to make sure, I went back and looked it up. This was a player that at Pitt over 2 seasons, I believe he either played in 65 or 66 games, missed a grand total of one of them in his first 2 seasons at Pitt, okay? And so I bring it up because, one, this is not a guy that was out all of last year or missed his freshman year. No. Basically, every game that his team played the last 2 seasons, he was on the court. And so there was no reason to think that if there was an injury that it was going to be anything significant. I also think that as he put together this roster, the thought was once you add Denzel Aberdeen, if something minor happens, if there's an ankle twist, if there's a whatever, I can't think of a random injury, but if there's something small, you have Denzel Aberdeen. He played point guard at Florida last year, and he can at least be a guy that kind of holds you over for a game, for 2 games, for whatever. So I don't blame Mark Pope for not anticipating that a guy that has no injury history is going to get injured. I think the plan of Denzel Aberdeen can always slide over and play point guard. By the way, it's easy to forget this now. When Jaland Lowe was out in the preseason, Otega Owe said, I can play point, put the ball in my hands. So I don't really blame Mark Pope for that. The other thing I don't blame Mark Pope for is because I see a lot of this. So there was a player named Caden Lewis who was committed to Kentucky. He was actually, I believe, Mark Pope's, first high school recruit that committed for the class. No, I think Jasper Johnson committed first. But anyway, Malachi Moreno definitely committed first. So I take that back. But Caden Lewis was a 4-star point guard in last year's high school class, but a top 30 prospect, really good player, was committed and signed with Kentucky a year ago. Well, the spring plays out. You take Jaland Lowe, and I vividly remember this. It was a Thursday night, was sitting there not anticipating doing anything, and you get this news that a Caden Lewis has decommitted. 4-star point guard, top 30 prospect, whatever. And you know, he ends up at Villanova. And so I think there's a lot of frustration of if you had just retained that guy, a lot of these issues would be solved. And then, oh, by the way, on top of it, Caden Lewis has actually been awesome. So I saw him in person. I was at that game in Vegas against BYU. That kid looks like an NBA player. Now, I don't think it's going to be this year. I don't think he's like one and done type talent, but he's averaging 10-5 so far. And he's a guy that I could see being like, you know, all Big East, you know, third team this year, and then be like Big East player of the year type good as a sophomore in 2026, 2027. At the same time, though, this is another one I don't really blame Mark Pope for. The bottom line is I think after that decommitment happened, he had committed before the portal cycle, right? And by the way, I know it's impossible for these high school players. You know, when the school you want to go to offers you a scholarship, you have to take advantage of it. But I think the counter to that is that it's just hard to know if you're a high school player where to go, because once the portal happens, stuff is going to change, right? And so with a Caden Lewis, I think there's now this pushback of, why didn't you retain a Caden Lewis? It's like, well, it came out once Jaland Lowe committed that a Caden Lewis did not want to go to a place that had a point guard that was going to be there for 2 years, right? So in other words, he didn't mind being a backup this year. But when you're talking about a player that's only going into his junior year like Jaland Lowe, now you're talking about a Caden Lewis being a third-year player before the ball is in his hands. And so Caden Lewis decommitted, kind of looking for a place that he could play earlier. And I think we can use revisionist history now, but the counter to that is that at the time, nobody was saying, take the freshman over the junior who was just all ACC third team, right? And I think you put yourself in a predicament where once you take Jaland Lowe, you leave yourself the option of this happening, but the converse could, the opposite could be true as well. Is converse a word? I don't know. I'm all frazzled by my settings, whatever. Bottom line is, once you take Jaland Lowe, you know there's a chance that this can happen, but then the opposite is true as well. If you don't take Jaland Lowe and you do put the ball in the hands of a freshman point guard, if he's not ready, then that torpedoes the season faster than any injury could. And so I don't blame Mark Pope for saying, hey, I got the 4-star here, but I got the third-year junior who just tore up the ACC there. What am I supposed to do? And so I don't think that you risk not taking a point guard to keep a Caden Lewis when a Caden Lewis was like, he was not projected as a DeBonsa, a Mikel Brown Jr. He was not projected as a guy that you could just put the ball in his hands day one and go full speed ahead. Okay. And so I just bring it up because I think it's easy with revisionist history to be like, should have just kept a Caden Lewis. It's like, well, then you don't get the third-year player out of the ACC who was third team all league a year ago. So it's a tough spot to be in. You know what it actually kind of reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of the reverse of what happened to John Calipari in the spring. Boogie Fland says he's not coming back to college, tests the NBA draft waters, wants to come back and enters the portal. Everyone says, Cal, how can you let that guy leave? And it's like, well, what's the alternative? If he comes back, if you take him back, now all of a sudden, either Darius Acuff, Malik Thomas, maybe both are going to reopen their commitments. And so now all of a sudden you got the reverse problem there. And so that is why Cal decided to not take Boogie Fland back. But it's also why Mark Pope decided to take Jaland Lowe, even if it meant potentially losing a Caden Lewis. Lastly, let me say this. The one place that I will blame Pope, I do believe with the 15 scholarships that teams now have, there's no reason to not have a little bit of everything on your bench and contingency plans and dudes that are break in case of emergency, right? You don't need 13 or 14 guys that can all ball. But what you do need is spot 13, 14, 15, if you're going to take them, are dudes that are just happy to be there and, you know, willing to play a role and willing to sit on a bench but also good enough in case of emergency, right? So I'll give you an example. UConn has a player, and I'm not just trying to make this about UConn, but I think it's actually a good example. UConn has a point guard at the end of their bench named Alec Millender, okay? If the name doesn't ring a bell, I'll be honest. No disrespect to the Millender family, but it shouldn't. He was at a school called IU Indy. IU Indy had a late coaching change, And really, it was like the middle of June, early July, something like that. Maybe it was May, but you get the point. And they fired their coach. And so they fired their coach. Alec Millender, weighs his options. There's the chance to come back. There's the chance to transfer to an equivalent mid-major school and play right away. But UConn basically sold him as, hey, we got this much NIL money left. You're a senior, right? You can go play at, I'm just going to pick a random school. You can go play at South Dakota State and whatever and play in front of 2,000 fans every night and whatever. That's fine. If that's what you want to do, that's cool. Or you can come here. You can be in the Big East. You can play on all these big stages. We're playing BYU and Arizona and Florida and the Big East and St. John's and whatever. And you can come here and be part of one of the great programs in college basketball. Now, we don't know how much you can play, but one, you're going to have the opportunity to earn minutes. And two, you're essentially going to come in to play a role no different than you would as a pro. And for all the criticism across college basketball, I think a lot of coaches use those roster spots like 13, 14, 15 very smartly. I talk about BYU quite a bit. I know BYU has some stuff going on in the legal world that you can Google if you want. But basically, they said, look, our three guys are AJ DeBonsa, Richie Saunders, and Rob Wright. How do we supplement around them, right? So how do we get guys that on the cheap can be the backup center, can be the backup point guard, can be the stretch four who only comes in and shoots threes? And you look at the back end of their bench, it's a lot of those guys. Now, they're still figuring it out like everybody else, just like UConn is, just like whatever. But basically, you look at the UConn example, you look at the BYU example, it's just, hey, you can go somewhere else and play a bunch of minutes, or you can come to one of the great places to play college basketball and be part of something bigger than yourself. And so where I blame Mark Pope, I don't know. I don't have a name. But what I do know is there was some point guard in the portal that's playing in the Mountain West, maybe not even the Mountain West, maybe the MAC or the SWAC or the Sun Belt or whatever, that you could have said, listen, we clearly have the NIL money. Come here. We'll pay you probably more than the school in the MEAC can pay you. And you'll be our 14th guy, and you'll be a great practice player, and you'll practice against NBA players every day, and you'll have that great experience. But then also in a pinch, we can, you're going to have a chance to earn minutes. And by the way, I should mention with the Alec Millender kid, he's actually played minutes. Silas Demery, UConn's starting point guard, did not play in UConn's opening exhibition against Michigan State. And so I could go on and on, but that is the only place that I would blame Mark Pope, is that I do think in this new era where you have 15 scholarships, take advantage of them. And there are players. Not every player is going to take that deal. Not every player is going to take the deal of, I'm going to come here, play less, be a part of something bigger than myself. But at a place like Kentucky, you're going to find those guys. So I'm not going to freak out yet. Kentucky obviously plays on whatever it is, Friday night. They then from there also play Michigan State next week. So listen, you beat Michigan State, all this noise goes away. But I thought I would hit on it really quick. I know Kentucky's getting ready to tip off here in just a few hours, but figured it was at least worth a conversation, and we will see what happens from